Hello. This week we'll take a slight detour to make sure we know how to give credit for the knowledge we found in the articles, and also add one more piece to what we already know. Before the detour, I wanted to follow up on the article summary assignments. The two most common notes I made across the class sections were for the section about the population and about writing in APA style in the knowledge section. For the population section, the idea is to keep in mind what group of people they appear to be trying to understand, which is not necessarily the same group they sampled. If the information in the focus doesn't mention a particular group, we have to assume they're thinking about people in general. For the knowledge section, it might be helpful to remember that the idea is that we have notes we can use in the literature review, so it's helpful to write them in APA style. In APA style, we don't refer to ourselves or our lives very often. The last worksheet will be for one of the articles you found when you practiced using PsycInfo last week. I did have you find 5 so that you can narrow it down to one that will be a good fit with what you already know. It helps you keep in mind that we'll bring all of the knowledge together to make a prediction about a relationship between two variables. In other words, we'll write a hypothesis. Given that, you might find an article that helps you think about what variables you'd like to include or what relationship you'd predict. When we incorporate the knowledge into our literature review, we'll need to use citations and references to give the authors of the primary sources credit. As you might have already noticed, there are a lot of details involved in the formatting for that. We can think about those details as we practice identifying the errors in some examples. If you haven't already read the materials on pages 5.1, you might want to do that before moving on here. Here's one. Pause the recording to decide what's wrong with this citation. This is what we call an in-text citation because we're directly referring to the author, so the year should be in parentheses right after the author's name, and we don't include page numbers because it's not a direct quote. This would be called a parenthetical citation because it's using the citation to signal that's where the original source of the ideas came from. That format uses an ampersand, or the and symbol, instead of spelling out AND, and there should be a comma before the year of publication. Note, too, that the period for the sentence is placed after the ending parentheses. Here's another one. Remember, you can pause the recording if you need to look at it more closely. This is another in-text citation, so the year is in the correct location, but we don't include the page numbers. We also spell out AND when it's not in parentheses. Earlier, I mentioned that we don't use the page numbers if we aren't using a direct quotation. I don't have resources in the course materials about citing for quotations, because I find that when we're learning about APA-style writing, using quotations doesn't work out well in many cases. It tends to signal the writer doesn't understand what they're writing about. That said, it's good to know there are different formats for other types of citations, including actually citing personal communication and if we have to cite a secondary source. The citations give us just enough information to find what we need in the references, which provide more details so that we can find the full source. Like citations, APA style has different formats for different publications, but we'll focus on journal articles since they're the most common. This reference has 9 errors. Pause the recording and see if you can identify all 9 before moving on. Here's the list of errors. Did you find them all? If not, you might think about what you can do to help you check for errors in your own references, and in citations for that matter. One thing I suggest is printing your paper and checking the printed copy. I know there's a cost involved in that, but our brains process paper differently than when we do on screen. And sometimes we see the things on paper we'd miss on the screen. When you're looking at several references, you might also find it's helpful to go through each section of all of the references at the same time. For example, just looking at the author formatting in each reference before you move on to looking at the year. You could use the reference guide as a checklist as you go through each part. APA style has a few quirky things. all with the goal of making it more efficient to find the information we need, and some that date back to the time before we had computers and printers when they used what was called typesetting. This list includes the 5 things that seem to cause the most confusion. Pause this slide to review the list and let me know if you'd like me to explain more. We'll finish up the article summaries this week and practice writing in citations and references. The design of that process is similar to what we did with the articles. You'll write citations and references for all the articles you summarized in the last few weeks. Then you'll check your work. Then you'll add a citation and reference for the article you found before submitting for grading. My goal will be to have that graded so you can use the feedback when you finalize your introduction paragraph next week. The midterms also due next week, but opens this week, so you can take it at a time that will work best for you.